The Quarterly, Job and Proverbs. Lesson 7, Proverbs 1, 1 through 7. The Fear of the Lord. The book of Proverbs is a collection of Israelite wisdom, given by the inspiration of God to lead us into a life that is well lived, because it is lived in keeping with the Creator's directions. Wisdom, chokhmah, simply means skillful living, and thus describes somebody who is living their life thoughtfully. It's not always a positive term. It can describe a cunning man like Jonadab, whose counsel cost Amnon his honor and then his life, as we see in 2 Samuel 13. But usually it's a good thing to live your life thoughtfully. And when the content of that thought is directed by divine revelation, it will steer people along the right path. The book is framed primarily as counsel from a father to a son, Proverbs 1:8. Although mothers were also involved in wisdom training in Israel, as we see in chapter 31, unlike some other ancient Near Eastern contexts. That parental relationship could have been part of a literal family, or it could have been more of a mentoring relationship. These proverbs were gathered by kings and royal scribes, as we see from chapter 1 verse 1 and chapter 25 verse 1. So the content is broadly designed for those who would serve at a king's court. For example, 22-29, though many of the proverbs would have originated in other settings before being gathered into the present collection and therefore would have a broader application. The word proverb, mashal, covers a vast variety of different kinds of sayings in Hebrew, ranging from pithy slogans to lengthy poems. The Proverbs are of Solomon, not because he invented or even collected all of them, as we can see from chapter 25 verse 1. Rather, Solomon was a noted collector of proverbs who exemplified the search for wisdom in ancient Israel, as we see in 1 Kings 4, 29-34. Although Israel is not mentioned again in the book of Proverbs, nor is God's covenant with his people, the introduction reminds us that this is covenantal wisdom. These are observations about life that are made through the eyes of faith. Proverbs 1:2 gives us the purpose of the book of Proverbs, which is to know wisdom and have the discipline, ESV has understanding, to live in accordance with it, by understanding words of insight. It's a book for the student, who can receive instruction from it, and for the teacher, who can use it to give prudence. It's a book for the simple and the youth, who are just starting out on the way of wisdom, and for those who have already acquired wisdom and understanding, that they may grow even wiser. It's not merely practical insight, what we might call shrewdness, that will help a person advance in life, although wisdom, chokhmah, can mean that. This biblical wisdom is about righteousness, justice, and equity, as we see in verse 3. That is, ordering life according to God's holy law. Specifically, the book does this by teaching proverbs, sayings, and riddles, the words of the wise in all of their various forms. Verse 6. One aspect of wisdom that comes to the fore in the book of Proverbs is relational skill, which begins with our relationship with God. That's why the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Without reverent fear, there can be no proper relationship with God. And if that relationship is out of order, every other relationship will also be out of order. But wisdom includes also other relationships as well. Relationships with spouses and with children, with superiors and inferiors, with kings and commoners alike. Now, if training is to be effective, it must have two components: instruction and modeling. Modeling wise behavior to our children is vitally important because actions speak louder than words, to use a secular proverb. Now, if we and our children were perfect people, and we lived in an unfallen world, then modeling might be all of the guidance our children would require. But we're not perfect, and neither are our children. And both imperfections introduce an element of what we might call static into the communication process. We don't always model behavior that is wise for our children. and for their part, they're not instantly able to analyze which of our behaviors is wise and which of them are unwise. And we also live in a fallen world where there is a disjunction between behavior and reward. In such a world, wise behavior does not always seem to be rewarded, nor does folly always receive its comeuppance. We live in a world where what ought to be is not always what is. As a result, direct instruction in God's wisdom will be necessary if we are to discern the right path to follow. This aspect of gaining wisdom through word-based learning is made more explicit in the second half of verse 2, for understanding words of insight. Wisdom comes not through a study of things in themselves, nor through a series of experiences, but through understanding words. Of course, these words are not isolated from real life. In Proverbs 5, for example, the writer gives a remarkably concrete picture of the adulterous woman. But the key is that it's not just a picture. It is an interpreted picture. He analyzes the situation and uncovers the hidden consequences of sin. A picture may be worth 1,000 words, but 1,000 words gives you a lot more room for analysis. The book of Proverbs is therefore very word-centered in its educational philosophy. Words are the tools of analysis, systematization, and ordering, and therefore words are the very heartbeat of the sage's work. Now we live in a society and age that is very resistant to word-centered communication. Multimedia presentations are very popular, very powerful. But multimedia experiences do not analyze, systematize, and order. Only words can do that. Well, with verse 7, we reach the key verse of the whole book. The fear of the Lord is the first principle of knowledge and wisdom. And the significance of this verse is underlined by the inclusio that is formed by Proverbs 1:7 and Proverbs 31:30. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, and a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. The fear of the Lord is therefore not just the beginning of wisdom, it is the end of wisdom as well. It is the heart of wisdom for wise and simple, for young and for old, for men and for women. Now, we often think of fear as a negative emotion, a subjective response to God, but the fear of the Lord is much more than that. In the first place, the fear of the Lord is a shorthand for our proper response to the objective revelation of God. In Proverbs 1:29, wisdom threatens the foolish with destruction, since they hated knowledge and did not choose the fear of the Lord. It's an action, not just an emotional state. Fools despise the fear of the Lord because they think they have nothing to learn from anyone else. To fear the Lord means to know God, chapter 2, verse 5, to understand who God is and what he requires of human beings. Yet knowing God is never an abstract, disinterested knowledge, in the way that you might know Latin or know calculus. It involves an emotional response of love, fear, and trust. Not fearing God, therefore, involves deliberately, albeit often subconsciously, suppressing the truth about God that bombards us on all sides. In contrast, fearing God, by definition, necessitates acting upon that knowledge. The fear of the Lord is our appropriate response of obedience to God's self-revelation. As Proverbs 3:7 puts it, the fear of the Lord is to turn aside from evil. In the same way, in Joshua 24:14, Joshua urges the people, "Now therefore fear the Lord and serve him in sincerity and faithfulness. Put away the gods that your fathers served beyond the river and in Egypt, and serve the Lord." Fearing the Lord is at the heart of covenant renewal. It's a commitment to obedience to your covenant overlord, to obey him, and not to rebel against his commands. That's why the fear of the Lord can be associated with covenant blessings, such as long life, honor, and wealth in Proverbs 10:27, 14:27, 19:23, and 22:4. Equally, that's why not fearing the Lord will result in death, Proverbs 10:27. Disobedience, the covenant overlord, will result in experiencing the covenant curses, just as surely as obedience results in experiencing the blessings of the covenant. There is, or ought to be, a proper fear of the consequences of covenant breaking in our lives. But the fear of the Lord is never a slavish fear. In Deuteronomy, the fear of the Lord is synonymous with the love of the Lord. The covenantal relationship is intended to be experienced as a blessing by the one who trusts in the Lord. The God whom we worship is our Father as well as our God, our refuge and our help in times of trouble, the Good Shepherd who watches over us as his flock. Fearing him will free us from having to fear anything and anyone else in this world. Application questions. 1. What are some proverbial sayings that you learned in your family when you were growing up? Are they in line with biblical truth? 2. Why is learning about relationships such a key part of learning to be wise? 3. Why is the family such a key context in which we learn wisdom or folly? 4. How can we grow in the fear of the Lord?